What's the end goal? It's to exterminate the Palestinian presence in the whole of Palestine from the river to the sea.
The Zionists loosely planning to take our land and to kill our people.
Zionists have never been interested in a two-state solution. They've just been riding the waves, playing along, manipulating America and the West.
أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم والصلاة والسلام على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وأصحابه أجمعين. Assalamu alaikum and welcome to another episode of the Stand4Palestine podcast. My name is Muhammad and I'm hosting today for the first time, sitting in Faraz's seat and with one of our guests, Anas. Assalamu alaikum.
Salam rahmatullah.
We've got Anas with us for the first time on one of our podcasts, and Anas is no stranger to Stand4Palestine. He's been involved with us for a very long time as one of our, I consider to be someone who is one of the leading voices in our community when it comes to analytics of the politics, the geopolitics in the Middle East and Palestine especially, and someone who helps guide us on a lot of our news updates, our political analysis and political guidance. So it's an honor to have Anas with us today, and we're talking about a very, very important topic. There's a lot that's been happening recently in Gaza, we know. We've been following the news of all of the updates there, the renewed military operations, the Gideon's Chariots 2, as it's been titled, the attacks on Gaza City, where as we speak today, leaflets have been dropped demanding that the entire population of Gaza City, 1 million people, leave the city. Otherwise, they face the risk of having their lives taken, of being murdered, and the Zionists advancing their plot for the ethnic cleansing of Gaza. But as we speak about all of this, and our attention is on Gaza, deservedly so, and our attention is on everything happening around Gaza, whether it's a Samud flotilla, and all of the politics around Gaza, we also have to keep our minds on the West Bank. And the West Bank is something that often goes under the radar. There's not as much attention there. There's not as much media attention and definitely not as much attention from our ummah. But today we'll be unpacking what's been happening in the West Bank since October 7, since before October 7, and what we expect to happen moving forward. So Anas, tell us, why isn't there as much focus on the West Bank when we're talking about Gaza?
Assalamu alaikum, jazakallah khair for hosting me. And the West Bank is really at this critical stage now. There's been some serious developments lately that we should be cognizant of, to be aware what's going on, and secondly, to be informed and to propagate the message as well to others. So the West Bank, really, the big title at the moment is the formal annexation of the West Bank. That's the context in which we need to see the developments in the West Bank at this stage. Because the last few weeks and days especially, we've seen new statements, new policies, a new set of policies on the ground that are paving the way for what's to come. What's to come is being openly stated by Zionists, that they want to now annex the West Bank to the occupying entity, at least 82% of that.
And their policy of river to the sea is no secret.
Absolutely. And to be honest, this is no secret. The Zionists' intentions are no secret. They do not stop at Gaza. And they've stated that repeatedly in the past. But obviously the focus has been on Gaza for a reason. But they've stated openly that once they finish with Gaza, then they're going to move to the West Bank, and even to the Muslims and Arabs that are inside the 1948 lands. What's the end goal? It's to exterminate the Palestinian presence in the whole of Palestine from the river to the sea. Obviously, what's delayed all of that is that they could not achieve the victory in Gaza to date, and that's what's been delaying their plans in the West Bank, Al-Masjid Al-Aqsa, and in 1948 lands. So that's broadly speaking what's happening. So for instance, now we hear about annexing 82% of the West Bank, which constitutes 18% of Palestine. And obviously this comes on the back of ongoing aggressions. For the last 2 years, the West Bank has been on fire. There's been ongoing aggressions. The settlers have been unleashed. We see Ben Gvir hand out M16s. We see ongoing aggressions, burning of farms, killings, persecutions on wide scale, arrests. That's been happening on a daily basis. But now it's taking a new turn for the worst, in which they are talking about formally annexing the West Bank to the entity, which means displacement, which means more settlements on Palestinian land in the West Bank.
Take me through how we've gotten here. Since October 7, our attention, like I said, has mainly been on Gaza.
That's right.
And in the mainstream media, definitely, we very rarely, if ever, hear about the West Bank. And in English-speaking media, even on social media and other places, we really hear about it. Talk me through, let's start from October 7 and move forward, then we'll talk about the background afterwards. Since October 7 or soon after, what were the sentiments like in Gaza, in the West Bank? How did the people on the ground respond? What did they try to do to aid the efforts in Gaza? What was happening soon after October 7?
Okay, so quite frankly, the situation in the West Bank is quite bad, and that's by design, meaning that the society in the West Bank has been stripped of its ability to resist and to provide any meaningful support to Gaza. And that's obviously, and I need to say this, nothing justifies what happened, that everyone has let Gaza down. Start from the West Bank and the Muslim world, the Arab world, that's clear for all to see. But we need to understand the reasons for that. And the West Bank specifically has been suffocated severely. And what I mean by that is that the policies undertaken by the Zionist entity, and when we talk about the policies, this is more like, we talk about the learnings that they've acquired after the first Intifada, after the second Intifada, and the extra surveillance they put in place, the mass arrests. And on top of that, you've got the Palestinian Authority that is acting as a first line of defense in the West Bank. And that's, that should not be understated or underestimated, because what you have in the West Bank is literally you have two layers of occupation. You have the Zionist entity, but before that you have the Palestinian forces. The Palestinian forces who are meant to be there to protect the people from the occupation, but ironically, their job is to protect the occupation from the people.
And it's crazy when you mention these people that don't know. When you hear the Palestinian Authority, you think that it's something that represents the Palestinian people.
Absolutely.
But their role is literally to protect the occupation, you're saying.
And that's by design. And that's why I need people to understand that this is 30 years in the making. And that traces back all the way to the Oslo Accords and the Madrid talks and all these negotiations that have been happening for the past 4 or 5 decades, which has got us to this point where resistance is stifled, suffocated, and people absolutely are left helpless. And to be honest, the people in the West Bank are unable to even help themselves, let alone help others, or help Gaza. They are watching the settlers come in and burn and occupy and cause havoc, and they are helpless. They have no means of defending themselves. So you are starting with that sort of, at that level, where the people, the society, they're just like me and you. They're burning, they are boiling, but at the end of the day, there's a reality on the ground that we must be aware of, and that is suffocating them and shackling the wider population.
So I guess a lot of this is the context that came before October 7. And
yes, absolutely.
I was hoping maybe to talk about after that and come back, but I think it's important that we actually highlight this context first, because we can't understand post-October 7 without understanding pre.
Yes.
We look at Gaza and we see that there's a strong resistance front there, that there are multiple groups who, utilized various forms of resistance to actually push back, even until now. Despite the massacres that have been happening for 2 years straight, they continue to inflict losses on the Zionist army. So why is that not the case in the West Bank?
It's a completely different context. So the way to look at it is that the setup in Gaza is completely different to the setup in the West Bank. And what I mean by that is the status quo that's been established in the West Bank, and that's been propped up by the Zionists and Americans in a way that results in what we see today in West Bank. Meaning, so I guess if we go back to, I'll probably go back to the words of Keith Dayton. And I want people to research that further. So Keith Dayton was a retired general in the U.S. Army, and he served as the U.S. security coordinator for the Palestinian Authority from 2005 to 2010. 2005-2010, he was tasked with, in his words, creating the new Palestinian. I want to create the new Palestinian. Well, so he...
and that was a shaky time, wasn't it?
Absolutely. And because at that time, you just came out of the second Intifada. Okay, and now you want Americans come in, and the Zionists, they want to secure the security and the longevity and the stability of the Zionist entity. So what they do is, we need an overhaul of the security situation in the West Bank and Gaza, obviously, at that time. But obviously, that's before things happened in Gaza between Fatah and Hamas, but primarily in the West Bank. So they say we need an overhaul, we need to reform the Palestinian Authority in a way that mitigates the risk of any potential harm to the Zionist entity. So what they do, Dayton comes in with his experience in the US Army, and he starts this intense training programs, indoctrination programs in Jordan for the Palestinian forces. So they would handpick people who obviously of a particular background, they're uneducated, mostly secular, and they would grab them, 2,000 of them in Jordan, intense training, in order to teach them that you are here to protect the Zionist entity. And that's the words of the Palestinian generals who gave a speech to these Palestinian security forces, in which he said to them in Jordan that you are not sent, and I'll quote him, you were not sent here to learn how to fight Israel. Rather, to implement the rule of law so that we can live in peace and security with Israel.
And these are Palestinians teaching this and learning this.
Yes.
And
at the hands of the Americans. And I'm just trying to explain the root cause and how we got here. The West Bank has been subjected to severe policies that you start to get into the details, they understand why we're in this mess in the West Bank. And then, that statement was said, and then obviously Dayton meets with the IDF in 2009, and a senior IDF commander goes to Dayton. How many more of these new Palestinians can you generate, and how quickly? And that's because that's your backbone now. That's your new backbone, where you have a new security forces whose task is to prevent resistance, suffocate resistance. And they became known as the Dayton forces. In West Bank, everyone knows these are the Dayton forces.
It's crazy to picture this, because growing up, you always hear of, a Palestinian who works to serve the Zionists is known as a collaborator.
Yes.
Is known as a jasus, a amir, a collaborator, a spy, right? And there's a lot of stigma associated with it. But from what you're describing is that those who are in the security forces are working to benefit the Zionists, and they understand this themselves, that our goal is to sort of live side by side. And yet they have the authority over the rest of the people, and they live in and amongst their families and in the same villages. And despite all of this, of course, they've gotten such a stronghold over their society that now they can't be, for example, shunned and turned away. They are the authority over the West Bank.
Look, you gotta give it to them. They have succeeded in their plans to some extent. But to be honest, in the grand scale of things, it's not surprising. You look at history, you look at any occupation or any colonialist force. When an occupier extends its influence over a country, the first thing they would seek to do is create an authority that belongs to that country. That has its allegiance to the occupier and colonialists, and to serve their interests. And they've done that in Palestine. They've done that, in American Afghanistan, the Karzai forces. Iraq, Chechnya, the Russians did that in Chechnya. So it's nothing new. The colonizer, the occupier would always seek to create a local authority to manage the affairs of that land on behalf of the occupier and to serve the interests. Now you can spin it however you want, and that's how, in a lot of cases, the more like junior members of the security forces, they're brainwashed, they're indoctrinated. It's not like, it's fun. It's not like you're going to work with Zionists. It's through a long process of indoctrination, brainwashing, and a lot of these people they're not necessarily mixing with the people. And most of them come from a particular background. They are uneducated, they are secular, nationalistic. They're already, from that perspective, they are not so much grounded in pure thinking.
Right.
So that's that. But that then, and then I think an important point to realize as well is the Palestinian issue has been subjected to a lot of conspiracies in the past to reach a stage of weakness that would justify reality-based thinking. What do I mean by that? So Palestine was an Islamic issue. Then deliberately it was reduced to an Arab issue. Then deliberately it was reduced to a Palestinian issue. And then when you as a Palestinian, you're resisting an occupier who's been armed and is backed up by the entire world's powers, then the discussion becomes, we can't face the enemy, let's sign peace and all that. And whoever stands in the way, it's like it's someone who just wants to, create chaos in the country. Let's have peace for now, tactically. And that's how they justify it sometimes to their own followers. But that's by design. That's by design.
See that mentality throughout much of the Arab world, I guess, and much of the Muslim world.
Absolutely.
There's something that you said which I think stuck out to me. You mentioned that the West Bank is not in any position to be aiding Gaza. Yep. And it really reminds us that the two struggles are tied hand in hand. It's not two separate struggles. One thing that comes to my mind is 2021 and the war that happened then. For those who are following the events at the time, it was cities in the West Bank that came under attack by the Zionist settlers in Masaf al-Yatta.
Yes, correct.
And it was from there that there was some pushback and some riots that started.
Yep.
And then there were attacks and desecration of Masjid al-Aqsa.
Yes, correct.
And the people of the West Bank took to the streets and started chanting, Ya Gaza, Yallah, Mishan Allah. Oh, Gaza, come on, for the sake of Allah, stand up and defend us. Yep. And the people of Gaza then responded with their own campaign. Yes. And we ended up with a military attack and assault on Gaza. It shows you that these two sections of Palestine are tied hand in hand, and they require each other, and they support each other when they need to do so. But as you said, it shows that the West Bank is unable to do that today.
Yeah.
Can you talk me through after that time, because we saw a lot of resistance in 2021 that perhaps we haven't seen after October 7.
Yeah.
Not only in the West Bank but also in the 48 lands. So
Yeah.
is there something that's changed since then?
Yeah, so a couple of things I would say. One is the what's called التنسيق الأمني, and everyone in Palestine knows this. The coordination, the security coordination between the Palestinian Authority and the Zionists has been heightened and has been heightened to new levels on security, intelligence, military levels, whereby there's ongoing surveillance and coordination to take out any threat before it becomes a threat. So what this means is there's extra surveillance placed on the populations, which means they can eliminate any potential threat early on. So that's one. Secondly, what this led to is that the Palestinian Authority with the Zionists, they were able to dismantle wings or pockets of resistance in Jenin, in Tulkarem especially, and that's due to the coordination. So in addition to that, I think one of the most important points as well is that and that probably can be applied to the post-Arab Spring learnings. And as I said, our enemies are not stupid. They are smart, and they apply the culmination of lessons learned throughout the prior struggles, the intifadas, as you said, 2021 thing, and the Arab Spring as well. So they realized we need to prevent an Arab Spring-like momentum by stripping the society from any person, from any potential leader. So any potential leader that's able to rally the streets, lead the streets, coordinate, is taken out.
Right.
Is put behind bars, and that's a key point that's happened in the West Bank, where they've arrested all the influentials, all those who can lead the streets, all those who can agitate and lead and take the masses out on the streets. Because, let's face it, in order to put up a great, just a reaction, you need some sort of coordination, collective effort. So they've dismantled the ability to coordinate collectively and to think collectively. And what you have then is just people frustrated, individuals here and there. But without the ability to coordinate and to plan out this in a coordinated fashion, whether it's resistance or otherwise, you need leadership. You need people who have influence on the ground, and all these people have been taken out and arrested, either in 1948 lands or the West Bank, and let's extend that even in Jordan and Egypt and other places, which explains why we haven't seen a serious reaction to what's going on.
So you're left with the people that have a lot of this emotion, a lot of this anger,
absolutely,
but no way to direct it towards any actual effective action.
Yeah, absolutely.
So this is what happens. Obviously, October 7 occurs. The whole world responds and reacts and is lit on fire, essentially. And the Palestinian issue comes to the forefront once again. So from what you're describing, the people in the West Bank feel the same emotions that we do.
Absolutely.
But they have no way to channel any form of resistance. What else is happening to them on the ground? What was the pressure that they were facing from the Zionists on the ground? How did their situation change after October 7?
So I think one other point is sort of the West Bank itself and what the people have been through in the last 15, 20 years. What the Palestinian authorities did is it has been sustained policy of suffocating the populations, killing the spirits. They've killed the spirits of the people. And I talk to people in the West Bank and whatnot, and that's the message shared on the streets. Before, in first intifada, second intifada, people came out. Intifada, yeah? But now you don't see that. So what happened? What explains it? The spirits were killed by the Palestinian Authority. When you go out and you're faced by someone who looks like you, and someone in your town, that sends a message. That sends a confusing message. Who am I fighting? What am I fighting for? Who am I resisting? What's the point? And that through that sustained policy, it led to that sort of demoralization of the struggle. But as well as that, I think what the Palestinian Authority has done as well is that it made life so difficult for the people as well on a society level. And again, people in the West Bank say that as well, where they say, before the Palestinian Authority, they lived under occupation and they had it better than when they're living under the Palestinian Authority, even in day-to-day life. They move, they have to work.
Yeah, that's one of the signs that for the people that talk about Palestinian state and living side by side and having our separate borders, you're telling that even under direct Zionist occupation was better than a imposed, puppet Palestinian government and authority.
And that's ironic. But that speaks to the reality on the ground that the solution is not in having Palestinian Authority, neither in having a Palestinian state, because they are not going to be working for the best interest of the people, rather for the best interest of the occupier. And so life was made difficult under Palestinian Authority. They've introduced these reforms in education to dilute the minds of the Muslims and generations with these foreign thoughts. As for instance, a lot of UN institutions came in to teach people about child rights, CEDAW, in the Western sense. All these isms that penetrated the society in the West Bank, and they tried to do the same in Gaza, but they couldn't. But also in festivals, concerts, they try to dilute the issue of Palestine in the eyes of the people. And that's what led to what we have today. And in terms of, I think your question was about more like the Zionist policies. On the ground.
And the pressure that I guess that they've placed on the people in the West Bank.
Yeah, so I mean, in terms of, just to give you an example, for a person to go work in another city, from Al Khalil, Hebron to Al Quds, for instance, he needs to leave at 3 a.m. to get to work at 8 a.m. That's 4 to 5 hours of travel on a daily basis. And then coming back at 8, 9 p.m. to sleep and then repeat the same again.
And that's a distance of a couple of kilometers.
Absolutely, yeah.
It shouldn't be a 6-hour trip.
Because the humiliation is at the cross borders, at the checkpoints, where they are forced to line up and stand for hours, where it could have been made much more easier. But they just want to humiliate the population in a way that makes them reach this stage of helplessness and so much difficulty in just doing things that we take for granted. Travel, work, and etc. So, and that's just on the work front and family front, let alone the oppression and the persecution and burning of villages and burning of olive trees and arrests and you have the settlers with M16s. So you have 700,000 settlers, and they are all armed, and they are unleashed. And they are unleashing on the populations where in the villages, and especially in the different areas in Tulkarem and Ramallah and other cities as well. Yeah,
we saw some efforts of resistance coming out of Jenin and Tulkarem especially.
Yeah,
and we saw times where there were various operations, and especially some of the young brothers in those areas who tried some coordinated efforts and small groups that we heard of, but they were quickly shut down, weren't they? We saw, Jenin especially was besieged by the Zionist entity for months on end. People there were literally sort of their homes were being taken, but there were bombs being dropped on them. Their homes were being destroyed. And dozens were being killed on the daily. The scenes that you would expect, I would believe that these days you would almost expect to see out of Gaza, which is a shame that we even say that. But we were seeing that in Jenin and the West Bank, and they destroyed any sense of resistance. And because they don't have perhaps the layers and the depth
infrastructure as well,
and the infrastructure that's available in Gaza to continue this resistance effort, that wasn't available for those in the West Bank and Jenin and Tulkarem.
Yep, absolutely. And again, that goes back to the point about the sustained policy of suffocating and preventing resistance and targeting the elements that could support the resistance in the first place.
Yeah. You mentioned work and you mentioned sort of crossing through checkpoints, but that's not the only factor, is it? A lot of the people in the West Bank work in the occupied territories.
Yes, that's right.
And that's an avenue that hasn't been available for years.
That's right. So since October 7, that's been prevented. So that you talk about hundreds of thousands of people who have not been working. So the situation is dire, and people are left without income for 2 years now. So the situation has reached that stage of just basic necessities are unavailable in many cities.
And this is part of what we saw, subhanAllah, with Gaza. When you look back to perhaps, just after 2006, and when we first sort of started seeing the siege on Gaza, this is how a lot of the policies that the Zionists started imposing there to starve the population started. It was restricting access, it was restricting travel, restricting work.
That's right.
And then from there, preventing access to widespread food sources, whether it was the farming and the crops, whether it was the ocean and the fishing and so on. And then from there, every now and then imposing these harsher efforts during their wars and during their attacks that would then prevent the population from thriving at all.
That's right.
Which culminated in the genocide that we're seeing at the moment.
Correct,
So it's not surprising to see this. It's the exact same thing that we've seen in Gaza just a couple of decades ago that we now see playing in the West Bank, subhanAllah. And that does something for people as well. I think that when you're sitting there and you're unable to feed your family and you've got all of the stress of finances, that prevents you from carrying that struggle day in, day out, because you've got all of these other stresses that impact you as well.
Yep, that's they all go through the same playbook. Again, applied in Egypt and Jordan. The main reasons is this. They've just made life so difficult for people that a father can't think beyond putting food on the table. That's a reality of how things are so made so difficult, so people don't think beyond the immediate family.
The West Bank settlements are an interesting one because they've been a controversial point,
Yes.
even amongst the West
That's
for decades, I guess. Since October 7, I mean, before that, we were seeing record number of settlements in the West Bank every single year, to the point that, if you'd go to visit the West Bank, every single time you go, you wouldn't recognize the roads that you were taking, or you see new settlements popping out. I remember when I went a couple of decades ago, one thing that struck me was that you'd stand on these mountains, and the West Bank and Palestine in general is all mountains and valleys, and you'd see the city lights, the street lights. And one thing that I saw at the time was that the settlement areas had white lights in the streets, and then the Palestinian areas had the yellow of warm lights. And you'd look out on these hills and you'd see certain areas that were just blocks of blue lights in the streets, and then the rest of it was sort of the warm lights. And then every time you visit, you see these more and more and more blue lights, to the point that you almost don't see where the West Bank starts and where it ends. Since October 7, that's increased even more. And one thing I want to talk about was the recent announcement of the E1 settlement, which I think Smotrich especially has been pushing, the finance minister of the Zionists.
That's right.
That's proposed to essentially divide the entire West Bank. How does that all fit into this plot to occupy?
It fits in very well within their plan, because what you see is re-entrenchment of this policy of spread out more annexations or more settlements that would pave the way for the formal annexation. It's clear by now that not only do the Zionists not care about international law and all the cries of international law and Western, all that, they don't care about anything at this stage. They don't care about the international uproar or the human rights commissions and the public opinion. They don't care about any of that. All they care about is that this is an opportunity to impose new reality on the ground, and they want to take full advantage of it. They are not hiding their intentions, and they are, yes, as you said, the E1 corridor is one of the bigger plans, 22 plus settlements that would divide the north and the south of West Bank, circulate Al-Quds, the blessed city of Al-Quds, and the Masjid Al-Aqsa with more settlements, which would further suffocate the Palestinians and force them into the main cities and the main city centers. Because that's, at the end of the West Bank is divided into 3 areas, as we know, A, B, and C. A is the only one that's administered by the Palestinian Authority completely, and that's like 18% of the West Bank. But that's where 85% of the Palestinians live. So you can imagine all the Palestinians are concentrated in the main hubs, in the main cities, in Khalid and Ramallah and Jenin, Tulkarem and Nablus, and these main cities. And the rest of it is just completely taken now. Like, that's the end goal. 82 to 85% of the West Bank completely taken out by the Zionists. And as we know, this is backed by America. Like now, Trump comes into office and says Israel looks too small on the map. So he's actually giving them a green light. You can now go on and do what you need to do.
And that's a strange one. I really want to ask you about that, because America's policy has always been critical of advancements in the West Bank. I mean, Biden, only just a couple of years ago, literally sanctioned West Bank settlers. He criticized, and his government continued to criticize until he was voted out. The expansion of settlements in the West Bank. We've seen governments like Australia and all over the West criticize this, UN sanctions and so on. But now we're seeing America giving the green light. I mean, Trump, as you said, is sort of giving them permission to do what they want. We've seen Mike Huckabee, the ambassador to the occupied territories, say that, we don't call it the West Bank. There's no such thing as the West Bank. We refer to it as Judea and Samaria. And so they've completely adopted the Zionist policy. Is this just Trump being Trump? Is this the Republicans just accepting what the Zionists are doing? What's
Look, it's a good question, because there's a lot of talk about two-state solutions. I think that's where it's going to.
Exactly.
I mean, America has been, since 1959, 60, they've been pushing out the two-state solution as the only solution for Palestine and for this conflict. But they've never really talked about the details. How does that solution play out on the ground? They left it very vague. What does the Palestinian state look like? So they've actually, up until Biden comes into power, even before 7 October, they didn't really go into details. But they saw that the two-state solution, obviously, and we need to keep in mind that this solution is not because they want something beneficial for us as Palestinians and Muslims. It's just to secure the interests of the Zionists and the stability of the region, because that's central to American policy. But Biden comes into power, and then Trump, and then they start talking about what does this Palestinian state look like. Forget even West Bank and Gaza. They didn't even commit to establishing a Palestinian state in the whole of West Bank and Gaza, which is 1967 borders. But their vision of a Palestinian state is one that is demilitarized, that does not really have real autonomy or sovereignty, that is powerless, and that's just like self-ruled. You have Palestinian Authority, self-ruling, self-governing, a place within Palestine somewhere, and that's about it. But look, things have changed after 7 October because what they saw is that this entity, which they placed in the heart of the Muslim world as a forward base and as a sign of the dominance of that part of the world, is being threatened, and we need to secure its interests in the best way possible. And they've also realized that maybe we can talk about that a bit later. The efforts to contain sort of resistance movements through elections and like Hamas and they failed as well. So we need to take a more like a hardline policy where we allow the Zionists to take an upper hand, we allow them to unleash, take more territory, and we will just turn a blind eye and give them green light. That's their policy at the moment. Zionists have never been interested in two-state solution.
Of course.
They've just been riding the waves, playing along, manipulating America and the West in going to negotiations after negotiations and peace process after peace process, just to buy time, until they find that there's an opportunity to expand settlements, annex. Zionists have always been clear in their literature, in their narrative, that they are not going to accept a Palestinian state, and we see it very clearly now. They're not going through that route.
And now they have the green light to continue in Gaza, do what they want in Gaza,
Yes,
and
absolutely.
to do what they want in the West Bank. America isn't intervening. America has no interest in stopping them at all, has no interest in even applying any sort of soft pressure.
No.
And we see that the people in the West Bank are really at risk of essentially what would be the next Nakba.
And that's the risk. Because at the end of the day, you have 3.4 million Palestinians in the West Bank. And they're already talking about certain things that they're introducing into their discussion. So they're saying anyone that holds a Jordanian identity card no longer belongs here. And the irony in all of this is the one who's saying it came from Ukraine and from Russia. And the one that's born
And they have
there
the second passport.
And they have second passports. And the person that's been born there, with his grandfather's born there, they don't belong here. And that's the biggest irony. They need to leave and they need to find that their homeland is now in Jordan. And you're talking about like 400,000 people to 1 million people.
And are they talking about removing for example, the Hawiyya or the Palestinian identity card?
That's all preparing the ground for that.
Yeah.
They started talking about it now, but who knows? It might happen in the next few weeks, few months, year, two. But they started to bring that into the conversation, that those who have Jordanian IDs need to consider that this is not their homeland. So that's something entirely new now. And then you've got the other element, which is making life so difficult, push people into the cities, separate the cities from one another, and that they are made to live in these big prisons, like Gaza. So Al-Khalil, Hebron will be the next Gaza. Open air prison. Tulkarem will be that. Ramallah, Nablus, Jenin. All these cities will become open air prisons, be seized, suffocated. If that's where we take the natural conclusion of this policy, that's the end goal. And yeah, they'll be forced to leave, or there'll be avenues that are made available to them, conspiracies with Jordanians and Egyptians, some sort of a deal struck here and there to these tyrants in return for some benefits. You never know, but that's where it's going.
SubhanAllah.
Yeah.
We talk about the Nakba in 1967, and that's exactly what we used to hear. Anyone who's Palestinian hears from their parents and their grandparents about crossing the borders freely between Jordan and Palestine, and one day the borders shut and you can't go back. You leave your home with a key and you come back and the borders are shut, or the checkpoints are there and you can't go back to your home.
Yes.
And this is exactly what we're describing. And we can assume, of course, that the Zionists won't allow in the West Bank today, maybe what they allowed in Gaza 15, 20 years ago, to allow for a resistance group to build itself there, to entrench itself, to utilize the land as it desires, and to set up for perhaps a struggle like what we see in Gaza today. When they do something in the West Bank, is what you're describing, when they try to mow the lawn, as they describe what they do in Gaza, when they try to destroy and ethnically cleanse the West Bank, there won't be any resistance.
Yes.
They'll wipe out the civilians and the homes and so on, and there'll be no one there to defend the people. Yeah,
the risk is real, and as I said, tracing it back to what the Zionists have been saying for a long time, is that they consider this part of the Judea Samaria, which is Jewish land. So they don't even recognize the presence of Palestinians. They don't recognize that this land belongs to Palestinians. They just consider this is their land, and with time and with finding the opportunities, they will annex more land up until they reach their goal of completely having Palestine from the river to the sea.
There's one important question. This is one I can't wrap my head around. you've described the West Bank as being completely neutralized due to, in part, in a large part, the role of the Palestinian Authority in imposing itself on the people,
Yes.
removing any resistance, taking the weapons of the people, colonizing their minds. But recently, we've seen a shift in rhetoric even towards the Palestinian Authority. We see Zionists saying that someone like Mahmoud Abbas is a traitor, is a terrorist, is Hamas, right? Talking about dismantling the PA, removing their authority, taking their weapons from them. How does that make any sense when we're saying that the West Bank is occupied the way it is because of the Palestinian Authority, but the Zionists don't even trust the Palestinian Authority?
Well, that's an interesting one because, and that's where we know that there is no logic or rationale when it comes to Zionists. They don't apply. There's no logic.
Yeah.
It's basically a case of we had the Palestinian Authority, it's doing a good job, but we just don't need it anymore. It's reached its expiry date. We need to, based on our new strategy, we don't need a Palestinian Authority. We just finished the job on our own. The new era, the new phase we are heading towards does not need the Palestinian Authority.
It's complete occupation.
Absolutely. Palestinian Authority was needed for a particular time to stand between us and the people, and to stifle the intifadas and to stifle the resistance and to act on our behalf, and more importantly, to take the burden. Obviously, the colonizer and occupier always carries the burden of looking after the people who they occupied. So when you have Palestinian Authority, they've carried the burden for 20, 30 years now. That's it. Thank you very much. It's over. It's like a company that has been using subcontractor for a long time. Subcontractor is doing a good job, but wake up one day, I don't need your services.
Yeah,
I'll hire my own men to do the job, and that's exactly what's happening here. They don't need the Palestinian Authority to be present for the next phase of their plan, and that's been even the point of contention in the Zionist entity, because some of them have been pushing back and saying, "Oh, well, with that Palestinian Authority, there could have been a lot more attacks against us." So that's just to tell you that the way the mindset is, they are not acting in a rational way or in a logical way, and that's going to backfire. And we'll talk about probably then the look ahead, because this arrogance and this heightened notion of I'm going to do it on my own, and just taking radical steps towards achieving what they want, this is going to backfire. 100%, that's for sure.
Tell me about that. Where do things go from here? Because it just seems like we keep talking about these simmering, boiling emotions. The Zionists go further and further, and we say, surely if they go any further, things will erupt. But despite all of that, they continue to go further. They continue to do more in Gaza, carry out this genocide. They now impose all of these new actions on the West Bank. They attack Syria, they threaten Egypt, they threaten Turkey, they attack Iran. They do all of these things, and every single time we say, surely this is too far, surely things will backfire. But it doesn't seem like they do. Where do you see things going with the West Bank?
Look, to be honest, the picture is one of, obviously from the onset you see it's doom and gloom. But when you zoom out a little bit and you see the situation of that land, Palestine, in the context of geopolitical struggles throughout history as well, and the occupation and the evil that they've been doing and the killing, there's only one conclusion, and the script has been written. The script is that this occupation cannot be sustained, this occupation cannot remain there. The actions, what they did in Gaza, these are not the actions of a state that wants to remain there, or that wishes to remain there. If it can be proud that it's going to normalize after this genocide, that it knows very well, as much as the rulers who normalize with them know very well, that these normalizations are not worth the ink that on the paper. They are normalizing with one another, patting themselves on the back, and they're not normalizing with the nations. And what they've done in Gaza will have ramifications and consequences. At the end of the day, the script has been written. It's just a matter of when, not if. No such occupation will ever remain in that blessed land. And that's that. No questions asked. It's just a matter of what are we going to do about it. And the other thing is, these policies on the ground, whether it's in West Bank as well, they are just fast tracking that ultimate end. Then they're bringing it closer. As we say, the most bleak hour is the one before that precedes dawn, and that's the most bleak. We're reaching that, and they are facilitating that day and night, which is a complete takeover and annexation and this genocide that's happening and the displacement, and all that will lead to the eviction of the occupier.
Their mentality, I think, is captured very clearly by Netanyahu. You've heard of the curse of the eighth decade.
That's it.
That there's certain prophecies within the biblical prophecies, the Torah and so on, that especially the previous Jewish nations have only lasted for 8 years.
Decades.
And they've had these prophecies in their books, and they've had sort of the scriptural leaders from the start of the foundation of their occupation saying that there is a risk that will only last 8 years.
That's right.
One thing that stands out to me is back, I think, 27 or 18, Netanyahu said in an interview that if we are to last to 80 years, we need to remove all regional threats.
Yeah.
And the thing that stood out to me is the fact that his eye is on this prophecy.
Yeah.
He's aware of it, and it makes him anxious.
That's right.
You don't talk about our nation needs to survive to 80 years unless you're actually worried that your nation might not survive to 80 years.
That's right.
And he's talking about removing all regional threats to the point that we see people who are an asset to them, like the Palestinian Authority, are now being labeled as a threat.
Yes.
They're almost fighting shadows. And I call it a self-fulfilling prophecies.
Yep.
Like as Muslims, we don't believe in this prophecy from a religious sense. We don't have anything in our Quran, in our Sunnah, in the works of our scholars that talk about 80 years for the Jewish state. But I see it as a self-fulfilling prophecy. That their eyes are so intently set on this 80-year deadline. Netanyahu is saying to himself, I have to make it past 80 years. So therefore, anything that jumps around me, I'll do anything to wipe it out.
Of weakness where they are on the back, they're sort of defensive, very defensive.
And then the more that you do that, you light up more fires.
Yes,
and you light up more explosions. And you invite more backlash against you and your people.
That's right.
And that's probably exactly what you'd expect to see moving forward.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And we look at the rules around they're all panicking as well. You know, we see even condemnations by some of these puppets like Emirates, which is funny because they're in the same camp. So what's going on there? They're all panicking. That's the reality. They're all panicking about where is this going? Where Zionists are driving in the front seat, and with them are the rulers, and the rulers are saying, "Where are you taking us?" You know, it's a dangerous ride, and to them, it's full of uncertainty because they know what's brewing on the ground. They know the boiling the sentiments on the streets, and that's the context in which we need to understand. You know, some of the same statements even from these rulers that are warning the Zionists not to proceed with these actions. Because they know what's coming, and they know that the situation cannot be sustained forever, which is what we see in the Arab world and Muslim world of this post-World War I architecture, which is abnormal. There's nothing normal about this setup, whether it's borders, whether it's nationalities, whether it's the way of life that's been implemented. That's abnormal. There's going to be a correction. You know how there's a financial correction to the market. Exactly the same correction is overdue in the Arab world, Muslim world, to bring things back to how they were. An ummah that's united, living by its own deen, restores its dignity, ruled by someone who is representative of Islam or Muslims, and will liberate Bayt al-Maqdis. And they know it's coming. It's just they're trying to delay, as you said, the eighth cursed decade.
SubhanAllah. And we have many evidences within our deen that talk about these sorts of struggles. Specifically, prophecies talking about Masjid al-Aqsa.
Yes,
absolutely.
absolutely.
When we talk about the West Bank, you can't leave out Masjid al-Aqsa and al-Quds from this discussion. This is central to our deen.
Absolutely.
The liberation of al-Masjid al-Aqsa. The hadith that talk about the appointment of a Khalifa or the capital of a Khilafah which unites the Muslim people in al-Quds. And then we have the ayat in Surah al-Isra which talk about the ulu, the great arrogance from Bani Israel, which is then repelled by the believers of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So these are prophecies that inshallah keep us motivated, continue to push back and resist, to not lose hope in the promise of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. As you said, that it's that darkest hour. But it's after that you see the hope. And I think it's in that moment that the ones who stay steadfast and continue to push will especially see the fruits of the rewards with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And of course in the dunya with the victory that we talk about that's promised.
Absolutely.
I guess just going back to the West Bank and sort of where things go from here. I mean, one thing that we've seen in the news this week as we speak is that there's been a military operation, if you want to call it, where a couple of armed Palestinian men boarded the bus and started opening fire on the occupiers in Al-Quds in Jerusalem. And that's obviously sparked outrage. And as you said, it sort of even sparked condemnations from Arab countries like the Emirates. How do you see these sort of things fitting into the West Bank? You're talking about all of this increasing pressure on the West Bank. We know that the Palestinian Authority, they're threatening to now take the weapons to dismantle them. They carry weapons. They carry many weapons that the people themselves might not carry. is there a chance that we see a rising front for resistance in the West Bank as this pressure grows?
Well, look, I mean, at the end of the day, as long as you have occupation, there'll be resistance. They're interlinked. That's a general point. You have occupation in Gaza, in West Bank, in Palestine. There's always going to be a reaction and a resistance to the occupation, and whether it's and that's the thing. They talk about eliminating resistance in Gaza and West Bank, but resistance is going to be something that is fixed. It's going to be there as long as occupation is there, and then people will resist that. People will never accept the legitimacy of this occupation. That's the premise. Whether they can resist or not, that's a different story. But that entity will not be accepted in the region because it's occupying the land that is not theirs, occupying people, occupying the blessed lands of Al-Aqsa, and this haqq, as we said, haqq la yasqut bil-taqadum. This haqq is not relinquished, or you cannot relinquish that because of the time. 50, 60, 100 years have gone past, so it's no longer a haqq. No, it remains a haqq that will remain there until the correction is in place. I think that's the premise, is that occupation, and that's their words as well. Their policies will cause more backlash, more resistance, more reactions. I mean, what do you expect? If you put that much pressure and oppression on the people, what do you expect? Are these the signs of people who want peace, or a state that wants peace? No, these are the actions of a state that wants to forcefully dominate and oppress and subjugate the people by force. And what do you expect in return?
SubhanAllah, it's when you look at just some of the events that are happening on the ground and some of the plots by the Zionists completely annex the West Bank, it's a bleak outlook.
Yep.
In some ways. But I think more than anything, it's a reminder to us of why we need to carry this burden on our shoulders, why we can't ignore the plight in Palestine, in Gaza, in the West Bank, and continue to struggle and push as much as we can to repel against this with all of our force to decolonize our ummah, to mobilize as an ummah, and to mobilize collectively to liberate Al-Quds.
Absolutely, and reminds me of another point which I forgot to mention earlier, and all these discussions also should remind us to go back to the basics. This is an occupation of Palestine, the entire Palestine, that needs to be dismantled. Because what tends to happen sometimes is the goalposts keep shifting. What I mean by that? You got 1967 borders, and everyone starts echoing that without understanding, the context and why they came into place, and we start to somehow parrot that call. Some Muslims start, we want 1967 borders. But have you asked yourself why or how, and all these questions? What's to say that in 20 years' time, whatever authority will be there in the future will say, let's go back to the 2024 borders. And that will be the sort of the call of the time, 2024 borders. We call for that. UN conventions, Arab League, and then you have Muslims rallying behind it. The goalposts keep shifting. And unfortunately, a lot of us shift with these goalposts in terms of our objectives and our aspirations. And not just that, they become the basis for negotiations. So they take land, and that becomes, they just put it in their pocket. It's for granted now. And then start negotiating on the basis of that something on the new developments on the ground, on the details, and you sort of forget what's happened last year or the year before, 1967. That's why I think we should not accept this premise or framework. The Zionists, that's been their policy, and policy of never relinquishing any land that they occupy, a policy of wanting to impose a new reality that becomes the basis for any future negotiations. And that's dangerous, and to accept that for this to be the basis for our negotiations and objectives and aspirations. This is an issue of the entire Palestine. We couldn't care less. 67, 48. To me, Hebron is no different to Yafa, and that's the haqq we should say and carry, because it's a battle of ideas and awareness before anything else. The moment you accept to compromise your language and your narrative and your aspirations and your objectives is the moment you relinquish your land and haqq.
SubhanAllah. There's a lot happening, and there's a lot that's changing.
That's right.
And I think this is the moment that we need to be especially firm and clear in the message that we're carrying.
Yes.
And in the politics that we're carrying, advocating for, and the solutions that we're trying to propose. I think that's probably a point that we can wrap up on, because I think it so beautifully summarizes just what our mentality needs to be moving forward with all of these threats in Gaza and in the West Bank. There's a lot that's happening. As I mentioned, the attempts to completely occupy and dismantle Gaza city, where 1 million people are currently situated. the attempts to occupy the West Bank, where there are millions of Palestinians, and this continues to push forward day in, day out. The Zionists lose sleep planning to take our land and to kill our people.
Yes.
So it's imperative on us to continue all of our efforts, to continue following the news, continue following the efforts to push back, whether it's the people in Palestine who are pushing back and resisting, whether it's efforts like the Smooth Flotilla, where I invite everyone to follow as closely as you can to make sure you've got your eyes on those who are putting, their lives on the line. As we saw today, the Zionists, just how relentless they are, sending a drone to bomb a ship in Tunisian waters. This is a reminder for us of just how far they are willing to go for their mission and just how much they're pushing back.
That's right.
And if we stay silent, then nobody else carries this burden. So subhanAllah, that's probably a point for us to wrap up on. Jazakallah khair. It's been very, very eye-opening. And there's so much that's changing, and there's so much that we need to be aware of and continue to be aware of, continue to read on, and continue to push back against. So make sure, the Stand4Palestine podcast is a new initiative. This is, I think, our 7th or 8th episode, but we have so much more planned. We have many, many exciting guests planned to come onto our podcast in the next few weeks. So make sure you like, make sure you subscribe to our channels, make sure you press the notification bell, follow on all of our platforms. We're on Instagram. We have news updates platforms on WhatsApp and Telegram, where you can receive daily, news updates of all of the breaking news in Gaza, in Palestine, and all of the surrounding region. So follow along on all of those, on all of our socials, and inshallah ta'ala, we look forward to seeing you with us again. Jazakallah khairan. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.